Okay, now we're going to be in Chapter 7, which is about the executive branch. So once again, the standard for this one's going to be 7.5, compare duties and functions of members of the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of Alabama's local and state governments and of the national government. The objectives for this one is discuss the executive branch, analyze the way presidents are elected, and it says about Alabama secession. We're really not really into that, but kind of cover a few things about the president, how the president is elected. The executive branch is the president that heads the executive branch of the United States government. Because of the power and influence of the president, it is one of the most powerful positions in the world. The first president was George Washington. That's important that you know. It seems like something simple everyone should know, but it's really not. A lot of people don't know that. So the president is over the executive branch. The president works alongside the vice president. Of course, right now the president is Donald Trump. The vice president is Mike Pence. So those are just the two people that are heading the executive branch right now. Here's some of the qualifications for president. 1, you must be at least 35 years old. Number 2, you must be a native-born United States citizen. Number 3, you must be a resident of the United States for 14 years. So the idea behind that is that you must be a native-born citizen, but another thing behind it is you must have lived in the United States for the last 14 years. You say, well, that doesn't make sense. You got to be 35. You got to be born a U.S. citizen, but you've got to live in this country for 14 years. Well, the reason why is if you move out of the country. Say you moved to Spain you lived in Spain for the last 20 years or whatever, and you just turned 35. You say, I'm going to move back to the United States and become president. You won't be able to. You got to live here for another 14 years. And the reason behind that is just safety precautions because they don't want you to go to another country, get their best interest at heart. You'll be working for another country and then come back and try to change things. They want to make sure you're here, that you're committed, that you're putting in some time. And that's kind of the reasons for the qualifications. Presidential elections take place every 4 years. The Constitution does not have a setup to elect the president by direct popular vote. It is done through the Electoral College. This is one of the most confusing things that we have in our government because people debate this all the time. Normally in elections, we have an election in class, and I'll say, for example, everybody who's in favor of us having a pizza party on Friday, raise your hand. Chances are to be a unanimous vote, and everybody raises their hand. I'll go and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, and I'll get the number, and then I'll say everybody who's opposed to having a pizza party on Friday, raise your hand. And then the people that's not going to be popular are going to raise your hands because maybe you don't like pizza or whatever. But the idea behind it is then I'll count that. I'll look it out. So I had 25 vote yes, 2 vote no. 25 wins, we'll have a pizza party on Friday. That's normally how elections go in our minds because that's how most elections are. But the presidential election is done a little bit different. They have what's called the Electoral College. If you remember from our previous video on Chapter 6, I told you there were 435 members of the House of Representatives. There's also 100 U.S. senators. The District of Columbia or Washington, D.C. gets 3 votes as well. So when you look at that, it comes to this, and I'll just put it up here so you can see it. There are 538 people. Once again, let me break the math down. 10 senators, 2 from each state. There are 435 members of the House, and D.C. has 3 votes, giving you 438 votes. That means that to become president, you've got to get 270 of the 538 electoral votes because that's more than half. So the idea behind it, whenever you get into a presidential election, you're going to have where both sides are going to be trying to reach this, what they call the magic number, 270. Now, there are certain states that are going to usually vote one way or another. These are pretty normal. Usually, California is going to vote most of the time Democrat. The state of New York is going to usually vote Democrat. You look at states, the Midwest, a lot of the states in the Midwest are always going to vote Republican. A lot of the states in the South are always going to vote Republican. It's really kind of, when they start figuring out what they need to get to win, they kind of count those states because of how they usually vote. Does that mean that they don't matter? No, that state can change things up. They can vote a different way, and it can play a role. Also, if you remember from the video about the census determines how many people or how much representation is in that state. since Alabama has 7 members of the House of Representatives and 2 senators, we have 9 electoral votes. That means we get 9 votes towards that 270. And you say, man, that's a lot. When you look at some of the other states, that are 30, 40, 50 electoral votes, it's not really that much. That's the reason why usually if you look at an electoral map, a lot of times the Republican candidate's going to win more states because they win a lot of the Midwest and southern states. But the Democrats usually win the big states, the states that have a lot of votes, with the exception of like Texas. Now, like I said, with states like Alaska, which is really big in landmass but really small in population, they only get 1 member of the House and 2 senators, so they get 3 electoral votes. And so they get 3 towards that 270. Now, you're going to have what's called swing states, and this is a lot to throw at you. And the other votes on the other videos on the voting process, we'll talk about this as well. But you're going to have what's called swing states, which are states that don't usually vote one way or another, and you really don't know from election to election how they're going to vote. 3 of the big ones are Ohio, North Carolina, and Florida. These are going to be 3 of the big swing states. Usually, to win the presidency, you've got to win at least 2 of those. And there's other states also that are swing states. Although the winning presidential candidate is usually announced that night, it doesn't officially happen until December when the electors meet to cast their vote. So basically, to make it official, we send these electors to go and vote specifically for the candidate. It's a projection on election night. So when they say, CNN or Fox News is projecting the winner of the presidential election is Donald Trump, as in this past election, that didn't really become official until December when the electors met to cast their votes. And then, of course, in January, his inauguration, he was sworn into office. Congress counts the electoral votes and announces the next president. So that's how the president's elected. It's a little bit confusing, but that's how the process is done. Presidents serve for 4-year terms. George Washington served 8 years, which is 2 terms, and that's typically what all presidents do, but refused to serve another term, and other presidents followed this example. Now, at the time, there wasn't an amendment that forbids you from running for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 terms. George Washington just said after 2, look, I don't want to be in power the rest of my life. We try to get away from a king, so I don't want to give myself that much authority. So it's time for somebody else to come in and take over. And other presidents pretty much followed that afterwards. Now, the exception to this was Franklin Roosevelt, which the 22nd Amendment kind of fixed this in 1951, limiting the presidents to 2 terms for 10 years because Franklin D. Roosevelt served for 4 terms. And so because the fact that he served so many times, they made the 22nd Amendment in 1951, which kind of got rid of that option. The president also has something called a cabinet, which is a group of presidential advisors. The cabinet includes the heads of the 14 top-level executive departments. Also, the vice president and other top officials join the cabinet as well. So you look at the 14 executive departments. You look at the Department of Agriculture and Homeland Security and things like that. A lot of them are going to be cabinet members. They're going to be advising the president on different things, and the vice president also can serve on the cabinet as well. Cabinet members advise the president on issues related to departments. If he's talking about something with agriculture, he's going to consult the person that's over the Department of Agriculture and say, okay, well, Secretary of Agriculture, and say, okay, well, what needs to happen in this situation or whatever. There's no mention of the cabinet in the Constitution, but it started when George Washington started with his Attorney General, Secretary of State, Secretary of War, and Secretary of the Treasury. So basically, it starts because George Washington had established some people to become advisors to him, people that he wanted close to him, Secretary of War, Secretary of State, people like that. Because this, presidents kind of added on to it over the years and made it really kind of a part of their presidency. The cabinet meets whenever the president sees for it to be necessary. So, just a few things about the president. The president is over the executive branch, means they're the ones that execute or they're the ones that enforce the laws. This is the reason why the president is over the military, This is the reason why the president is over the FBI. This is the reason why the president is over the Department of Homeland Security and Border Patrol and things like that, because he is over all the branches that are law enforcement. Because the executive branch executes or enforces the law that the legislative branch passes. Remember we talked about last chapter. The legislative branch passes the laws so the executive branch can execute them. And so the executive branch can make sure people are following that. The next one we're going to be talking about is the Supreme Court, which is the judicial branch, and they're going to interpret the law. So that's just a little bit about the executive branch, which is headed up, of course, by Donald Trump. We will tune in for the next video, which is on the judicial branch, and learn a little bit more about that.